Here are my thoughts on writing a technical report for a smaller 6-month project. So this goes for undergraduate projects 1 semester long and also for sprints of postgraduate projects. Things get a bit different when you go to larger projects. You need to do more upfront planning. Now, it's always useful to think about the end point. What does a good technical report look like? What are the attributes that it's supposed to have? A good report does 2 things. It allows future workers to reproduce your results, and it allows assessors to check whether you have done the work required during the project that you were working on. Notice that neither of those goals in the final report involves telling a narrative story of your work. And this is a common mistake that students make. So the story elements have no place in a technical report. I also recommend a system of multiple drafts. In the first draft, your goal is to ensure that you capture all of the knowledge that you have about the project in a complete form. This will usually involve copying information from your logbook and from your brain into this draft report. Your goal here is to be as complete as possible, not to be as good as you can be in terms of your writing or wording. Once you've captured all the information in your first draft, you will edit your second draft for structure. There are a number of standard structure elements that are usually found in technical reports. I'm not that hung up on particular headings, but it's useful to distinguish between literature, a discussion of your methods, the main results, and conclusions. I would recommend that you only write your introduction after having organized the information from draft 1, so that you have a good idea of how the introduction will articulate with the rest of the structure. At this point, you're not really taking things out, you're just moving them around so that you know what goes where. The next round of editing focuses on refining the concepts in the document. This can be done by your supervisor or by somebody close to you who understands what you've done. It's usually a bad idea to try and do this yourself because you are so close to the report that you may miss that you have glossed over some details that need to be explained more. So this is a good time for an external editor. This is probably the section that takes the longest. Here we're looking at the flow of argument, the major points, making sure that everything is presented in an understandable way. Also bear in mind that this process may repeat a number of times as we go from the flow of argument back into rearranging some of the items into different points. However, once we have a well-flowed, well-structured document, there is a final edit to be done. It's best to do all language editing right at the end. Of course, you can save yourself a little bit of time by making sure that you use relatively good language throughout. But it's a waste of time to check the spelling and concord of sentences that are going to be reworded in order to get a better flow of argument or make the presentation more understandable. So save the language editing for right at the end and make sure that you, again, try and use somebody who's less close to the report. There are many tricks to copy editing, like for instance reading the sentences back to front, or again using people who are completely unfamiliar with your material. They'll spot errors much more easily because they're not really reading across the flow of argument. They're not skimming over the words. They may be more able to focus on the real words that you are using. Now, I quite like this analogy which I came across at some point, where these successive drafts are related to making a beautiful vase out of clay. It's important to start with far more clay than you're going to use in the final vase. So the first draft, where you are dumping all the knowledge that you have, will inevitably contain much more things than the final report. But it's far easier to cut away at the pieces that you don't want than to bring them in later. The repeated edits for structure and concepts are like forming the pot on the wheel. So in this place, we are actively interacting with the structure of the document, going back and forth and seeing what structure is most pleasing. The final round of editing is like the polishing and decorating of the pot. It only works once we have the complete structure nailed down. It's useless to try and decorate the pot while it's still being formed, as we'll inevitably be rubbing out those marks towards the end.